There's a lot of smoke that Brian Flores could be the next defensive coordinator for the Dallas Cowboys. We'll tell you why that makes sense next.
You are Locked On Cowboys, your daily Dallas Cowboys podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us the number one sports podcast network. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. He is Landon McCool. And on today's show, we're talking about some potential defensive coordinator candidates, assuming the Cowboys move on from Matt Eberflus at the end of the year. Just by judging by what Jerry Jones has said, maybe what he hasn't said, Landon, it sure seems like it would be quite a surprise if Eberflus is back in 2026.
Yeah, just by taking the temperature of the room, by like you said, the subtext of what is said and unsaid. And we talked about this a few weeks ago. Like, a few weeks ago when they asked Jerry about the stableness of Eberflus, that defensive coordinator, he was non-committed, and he was about as resounding a non-committal as you can get from an owner 3 weeks away from the end of the season when they still have a lot of evaluation to do. So it feels like the writing's been on the wall for a little while. I don't feel like the last game changed anything there. In fact, it may have further reinforced it rather. I think it's safe for us to kind of speculate about the next defensive coordinator for the Dallas Cowboys.
If the Cowboys, hopefully, when the Cowboys fire Matt Eberflus, we'll get into this more. But the reason why we're talking about this here on a Monday is because there's been a lot of smoke about Brian Flores, who is currently the Vikings defensive coordinator, being the next defensive coordinator for the Cowboys. And the reason being is his contract is up at the end of the season. Minnesota would like to get him back, but that's no sure thing. And we actually started to hear this a couple of weeks ago after the Cowboys played Minnesota. I think it was Ed Warder who tweeted out that the Cowboys were really impressed by what Brian Flores did in that game. I know by ball watchers and film watchers, they all think that Flores is one of the best defensive coordinators in the league. How big of a hire would this be for Dallas?
Oh, it would be enormous. The Cowboys really haven't had a kind of true schemer in his prime like this in a little while as a defensive coordinator, right?
Since Wade Phillips?
Well, I was going to say Wade Phillips is probably the closest thing, right? Where he was really in the middle of, before his Super Bowl run, was really in the middle of his prime as a play caller when he was with the Cowboys. I think, it's a pretty appropriate comparison in the sense that Flores is sort of unique. We talk about a lot of these offensive and defensive coordinators who come from a very kind of specific and well-worn, coaching influence tree. And Flores comes from he's kind of like the modern version of the Belichick defense, right? It's they're going to do a lot of blitzing, but they've added in a lot of interesting stuff like non-traditional Tampa stuff and match quarters on the outside. So it's almost like a marriage between Belichick and Saban in some ways. So and he blitzes at a rate that's obviously very unique and I think it's very successful and they have a whole system behind it. It's not just blitzing for blitzing's sake. It's blitzing to get your very specific reaction so that you dump down to the flats, and then they've got a plan to tackle you for a loss when you dump down to the flats. So yeah, Flores is considered to be kind of I don't want to say like the Kyle Shanahan of the defense, but he is, as far as X's and O's go, he's a guy that is extremely well respected, maybe very unique, and certainly a top 3 to 5 defensive play caller in the league.
First of all, I love his style. I remember a game that he was coaching when he was the head coach of the Dolphins. They were playing the Ravens, and they were just relentless in the way that they blitzed Lamar Jackson. It was like cover zero, play after play after play. And they're going to keep doing that until you beat them. And even if you beat them once, they're going to keep that pressure on. I really like the defensive coordinators that aren't the bend but don't break. But hey, we're going to be the aggressive one. We're going to set the tone. We're going to dictate what you have to do on offense. In a lot of ways, I mean, it's in terms of scheme, it's not one for one, but he reminds me of like Rex Ryan at the peak of Rex Ryan,
in some ways.
Hey, we're going to blitz. We're going to rely a lot on our corners to tackle and to cover, but you're going to have to make quick decisions and be accurate. And there's a lot of bad quarterback play in the NFL, and that doesn't work for a lot of teams. They just can't figure it out. Even look at someone like Dallas with Dak Prescott, who is one of the team, league's best quarterbacks at beating the blitz. He even struggled against it. If he were to be available, Landon, like this is easily the number one option that you have to go out and get.
100%. Like, I mean, the question I think to me is like, how likely is this? Is this just a case where we're getting chum fed into the water by Flores' agent as a way to try to drive up the price, or is there legitimate concern that the Vikings aren't going to be able to re-sign Flores and have him come back? So
what if both are true? Because I honestly think that's part of it. Like I think the Cowboys have a lot of interest in Brian Flores.
Yeah.
I also think Brian Flores' agent is doing a really good job of making sure that it's known that the Cowboys have a lot of interest in Brian Flores. So
sure.
I think both things could be true.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of times we get this stuff and it's completely out of nowhere, right? And it's just created for the case of driving up a particular player or coach's price. But we know that we don't know that that's necessarily, but we're assuming here that that's not necessarily the case. Like Ed Warder and some other folks like who are tapped into what the Joneses are thinking are, reporting this weeks ago, right? Like, before this whole situation. So
they were very impressed with him. Yes.
Yeah. So I do agree with you that I don't think this is just the run of the mill, like, oh, agent using the Cowboys to leverage out of more money. I think this is a case where Brian Flores' agent saw that Ed Warder report is like, hey, let's lean into this for some more money. Now, the question again becomes, what's going to stop the Vikings from being able to re-sign Brian Flores that in the Cowboys be able to? Is it just simply a money situation? Is it a situation? So those are the questions that kind of still remain to be seen. But to be very clear, if Brian Flores is available and it's just about like money or whatever, the Cowboys need to do whatever they can to try to secure his services because there just aren't a ton of these guys available. He's a rare commodity. There's no salary cap in paying these coaches. The Cowboys need to use their money advantage here to their advantage.
And one of the things I really like about Flores, if he were to be available, it's not like his defense relies on elite talent to be an elite unit. I mean, if you watch the game on Christmas against Detroit, I mean, they've got a lot of like average players out there, and there are a lot of smart players, but there's not a Myles Garrett or a Patrick Surtain or Chris Jones on that defense. They're doing it as a unit, and I think that's what Dallas needs, is somebody that can tie the pass rushing stuff and the coverage stuff together without having 4 or 5 all pros on this unit. Brian Flores has done that time and time again. And there's a reason why he's so highly regarded around the NFL.
Yeah, I mean, again, very similar to Belichick, right? Where you just get guys who do their job, as they used to say, and that are smart football players who maybe they aren't always the elite athletes, but they are, their skills are boosted by the fact that they are in a scheme that was working for them. They're playing the way that they're supposed to, and that they can play fast. And because they're constantly pressing the advantage, it puts the offense on their back foot. I mean, think about how Belichick used to take away the best option and make you play kind of sort of left-handed with your second best receiving options. It doesn't require excellent athletes to kind of, execute these schemes. It just takes people who play aggressive and are smart and know how to adjust sometimes mid-fly of the snap. That's the kind of player that you see in the Brian Flores' defenses.
You know how pessimistic I've been about this team for as long as we've done this podcast. But if you hire Brian Flores, this is probably the most excited I would be about this Cowboys team in a long time, because I think he is that good. And I have a lot of faith that he can get this defense not only to play at an average level, but better than that, even with the talent on this defense. I know it's a pipe dream. It probably won't happen. But the fact that he's even being mentioned, in connection with the Cowboys does make me feel better that maybe we're going to get a top-notch coach on that side of the ball. Landon, if it's not Brian Flores, who are some of the other options the Cowboys could consider? We'll get to that next. This episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. Whether you're starting a new routine or jumping into player projections for the first time, trying something new can feel like a challenge. But with Prize Picks, it's always good to be right. And with high pressure football matchups every weekend and elite hoops action almost every single night, the action never slows down. And Prize Picks lets you stay in control. Prize Picks is the daily fantasy app that makes watching sports even more exciting by letting you build lineups based on player projections, no drafts, no waiting, just pick more or less and play the way that you want to play. And getting started on Prize Picks is quick and simple, and the app is super easy to navigate. So download the Prize Picks app today. Use promo code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's promo code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, it's good to be right. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen every single day. If you haven't already, go check out the new Everydayer Club. You're going to get ad-free access to the Locked On Cowboys podcast, compatible with Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and every major podcast app. It's only $5 a month or $50 for the year. So go to lockedoncowboys.supercast.com to learn more. All right, Landon, let's talk about some other candidates out there. I think you and I both believe that the most likely path here for the Cowboys is that they're going to hire a former head coach that has a defensive background to be their defensive coordinator. Just look at their history, right? It's Matt Eberflus now, head coach of the Bears. Dan Quinn, head coach of the Falcons. Mike Nolan, who was the head coach of the 49ers. Rod Marinelli, head coach of the Lions. It seems like this is the way that the Joneses want to find their next defensive coordinator.
Yeah, I mean, clearly they have a preference for somebody that could, if necessary, step in and be the kind of interim head coach if they need it to be. They like that level of experience in the NFL. I mean, I think it's a preference. I don't know if it's necessarily a wise one or a good choice, or I haven't really dove deep into the numbers of the pros and cons of picking only, experienced head coaches versus, going out and trying to find the next generation of defensive coordinators. But I think it's kind of resulted in some pros and some cons, right? And I think we saw this last year, Eberflus obviously being a con situation. I also think that this year that you're getting a little bit better crop of options of former head coach defensive coordinators than you got last year, at least two that potentially are coming to mind. And again, we're staying this, on December 28th with still one more week to go. Yeah. So some of these guys are still employed, obviously. So we don't know for sure. But I think to me, the two names that kind of come up are Jonathan Gannon and Jim Schwartz, right? Jonathan Gannon, currently the defensive play caller, but head coach of Arizona Cardinals, and Schwartz is the defensive coordinator for the Browns. So obviously both of them are still employed currently. That doesn't necessarily seem to be trending in that direction for the end of the year. We'll see. But those are two guys whose names I think are probably the most interesting names of the guys that we're speculating could be available at the end of the year.
Yeah, I think the Cardinals have now lost 8 of their last 9 games. I think they're 0-8. Their last win came against the Cowboys. Shocker. You and I are actually talking on the phone, and I totally forgot that there's a connection here with Clayton Adams, who is the Cowboys offensive coordinator, who is the offensive line coach under Gannon. It seems like the Cardinals are going to move in a different direction here. We don't know that for sure. But maybe for the listeners that don't know much about Jonathan Gannon's defense, what style of defense does he generally have?
Yeah, I mean, he's the number one. Maybe you know this better than I do, but I'm pretty sure last time I checked, he is the number one user of cover for coverage in the NFL.
Yes,
and I think it's probably a pretty large rate, if I'm not mistaken. So it's a lot of match coverage stuff, and that's the stuff that really kind of really got them into the Super Bowl when he was with the Eagles, and that it's very effective as both a run defense and defending the pass, especially a deep pass, and I think it would be a pretty decent overlay fit for the Cowboys. I mean, we have to that's the thing about the Cowboys currently, is that they're almost kind of a wide open book on the back end at this point. If Diggs is not coming back, Bland can kind of play both coverages. Revel is still so young that it feels like you still don't need to make plans for him at this point. So I think the Cowboys, could make a pretty simple transition, as simple as any other defense, to what Gannon does. It's a 4-man front for the most part. The coverage stuff would be mostly the same, except for the increased usage of 4, which again, they do a lot of man match stuff. So it's a lot of man coverage looking stuff. So that would be very familiar to what the Cowboys have at defensive back. So I think it would be a pretty decent transition from one to the other.
I think the only concern with Gannon, and again, you shouldn't read everything into this, but the Cardinals defenses have not been great over the last couple of years. Actually, they got shredded today by the Cincinnati Bengals, but you look at their defenses under Gannon, 25th in try that again. 31st in points allowed in 2023, 15 in 2024, 29 in 2025. But maybe this is a case of overworked as a head coach. If he can focus in on defense, he's a much better guy.
Yeah, personnel, I think, is part of it too. They've had kind of hit and miss with their personnel. He's been able to make it work with some guys that they had on that roster that didn't work previously, right? They've consistently needed Calais Campbell to kind of come back in and at different points to kind of come help that young to help the defensive line function. So, and Budda Baker is a great player, but he's been in and out of the lineup at certain points, and certainly not something you can build a defense around a little bit. So, yeah, I mean, again, I think if these guys were super lights out, they probably wouldn't be available at this point, because they'd be either head coaches or they would still be currently head coaches, right? But I think there's always some circumstance there with the Cardinals. They're a little bit different team. You think maybe that if you get him a little bit better personnel, get them. There is a lot of spending to be done this offseason. I think that could be something that's very attractive to these defensive coordinators. Is clearly the Cowboys are kind of pot committed to spending a lot of resources on the defense this year. Right. So I think that could help can draw us again and maybe help him once he gets here.
The other one that you mentioned is Jim Schwartz, who's currently the defensive coordinator of the Browns. Now, the Browns did win on Sunday. Thank you, Cleveland. But they are 4-12 right now. It seems like there's a good chance that the Browns kind of clean house. They move on from Kevin Stefanski, and that would allow Schwartz to become available. He is a wide 9 defensive coordinator where you're going to have really wide splits. His run defenses have actually been average, middle of the pack. Maybe that's something that Jerry Jones and the Cowboys won't like, but they're always really good against the pass.
Yeah, and I think it helps. This is one area where I think it helps that you've got those 3 defensive tackles that you do, because I think if with strong defensive tackle play, I think it will help with the issues in the run game, right? Because part of the issue is he does play those defensive ends so wide that it does leave a lot of gap space for a lot of operation for that offensive line.
You've got to have some awesome linebackers in that scheme. And to his credit, they drafted Carson Schlesinger this year, and Devin Bush is playing some of the best football of his career. So you need good linebackers in that scheme.
So yeah, I think to kind of your point, I think if you get in that scheme, you're definitely focusing on linebackers, something that you probably were already focusing on anyways. But I think it's a really good fit for the personnel you've got, because on the defensive line, because you've got a guy like Ezraku, who I think would really kind of fit the body style you want for those wide 9 attackers on the edge. So, and I think the defensive tackle position is talented enough to kind of compensate for the schematic losses in the run game by having your defensive ends play so wide.
All right, I'm going to throw out some other names to you, and I just want your thoughts as soon as you hear the name. We'll do that next. This episode is brought to you by Gusto. Let's be real. No one starts a business for the joy of calculating tax withholdings or managing payroll spreadsheets, but that's where Gusto comes in to take the stress off of your payroll, benefits, and HR so that you can focus on running your business and supporting your team. Gusto is the all-in-one remote-friendly payroll and HR platform that makes managing your team simple, transparent, and fast. Whether you're hiring, onboarding, or paying employees, Gusto helps you do it all from one place without the hassle or hidden fees. and unlimited payroll runs for one monthly price, which means no surprise charges at the end of the month. And Gusto's automatic tools like offer letters, onboarding materials, and direct deposits save you hours every single week. So try Gusto today at gusto.com/LockedOnNFL and get 3 months free when you run your first payroll. That's right, 3 months of free payroll at gusto.com/LockedOnNFL. One more time, that's gusto.com/LockedOnNFL. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen every single day. I want to run through some other names who could be available this offseason. Let's start with, I know the name that everybody's probably screaming right now. What about Al Harris, who is currently the secondary coach in Chicago? Is there any chance the Cowboys bring him back?
I don't think so, for the reasons that we kind of talked about, in the last segment, right? The prerequisites the Joneses kind of have for this position. Beyond the fact that he hasn't been a head coach, he's never been a defensive coordinator. He's never been a defensive play caller. I don't know that he's calling coverages for Chicago currently, right?
No.
Again, like, I think that there is somebody out there who's going to be willing to give Al Harris an opportunity to kind of take that next step. But I think it's a pretty big next step he's got, right? Like, he has been working in an area specifically where he is very specialized because he played that specific position, playing defensive coordinator, play calling. Like, now you're talking about all the defense writ large, and it's not a simple step up. And again, like, I just don't know that the Cowboys are interested in being the team that provides that opportunity. I think they prefer guys that have a lot more, skins on the wall and know what they're doing.
So would that rule out, do you think, any like college coordinators or guys trying to make the jump from college to the NFL?
I think it depends on who it is, right? Like, I'm totally blanking on the Oklahoma head coach who's
like Brett Venables. I just don't think he's going to leave Oklahoma to be
I think it's that thing where it's like, I think there are a couple of those guys who I would say, yes, they may take that chance up, but they're the guys that aren't going to leave, right? That are like in really cushy, college gigs where they're in control. Yeah. So, I just think that, the closest thing that we can get to this, I think, is if they were somehow able to poach someone like Jim Leonhard from the Denver Broncos.
I was going to bring him up. Yep.
Yeah, because he's, the situation currently is that he is, I think, technically an assistant head coach, right? That's a move usually done as we've been aware, right? To kind of secure the services of a top assistant so that they don't get poached, right? Now this is a little bit different because I don't think he's currently the play caller. And so you would be providing him an opportunity to be obviously the play caller and run the show as the defensive coordinator, which he isn't currently doing. So I think that's, but the question also becomes, is Van Joseph leaving to go get a head coaching gig? Right. Is Jim Leonhard left, the heir apparent to the Denver gig, or is he going to leave to go with Van? So there's a lot of, speculation in all of this, but especially there.
But see, that's a really good point. I don't think the Cowboys can drag their feet on this one because you don't want to miss out on these guys waiting for, let's say, Brian Flores to maybe have all these head coaching interviews. He goes and gets the head coaching job of the Titans, just making it up. And now we're into February and all these other guys are hired. You don't want to necessarily do that either. But if you can get Jim Leonhard early in the process, maybe you lock him up before Vance Joseph even decides if he's leaving. A couple other names I wanted to mention.
Yeah.
What if Andy Reid retires in Kansas City and Steve Spagnuolo, the Chiefs defensive coordinator, becomes available? Because if you're not getting Brian Flores, I think Spagnuolo might be the next best option.
Similar, right? Similar kind of player and a coach. In the sense that, he's a guy that has been a head coach before, right? The question on whether he wants to be a head coach again is we should also have a whole conversation about Brian Flores and his whole situation, because I actually think it figures into it. But back to Spagnuolo, I don't know if he wants to be a head coach.
He's 66. I just don't think he's going to get many opportunities to do it.
It's probably fair, right? And so I think if he became available, it becomes a bidding war, because he's a guy that, like, again, once you get your hands on one of these guys who you can hold on to for the long term, who's really, really good, it just provides a level of stability that's just really unmatched, right? Because it's so hard when you have a talented guy to lose them to head coaching opportunities, like obviously what happened with Dan Quinn. But if you can get a guy who's talented and, you know, provides stability on the defensive side of the football and isn't going anywhere to go, you know, to be a head coach, it's a really powerful thing.
Any chance someone like Joe Witt Jr., who the Cowboys wanted to hire as their defensive coordinator, he left for Washington. He got the play calling duties taken away from him
I was just going to say
Dan Quinn. So I wouldn't be surprised if he's looking for another opportunity to call plays. I wouldn't be surprised if he gets fired in Washington. Is that somebody that you would be interested in?
I think it would be a tough sell to us to, like, you know, go out and get Joe Witt Jr., who, I mean, again, I felt like even the defenses in Dallas at the end of the end with Dan Quinn started to go a little bit stale. I just wonder if that style of defense is just not as valuable as it once was. And beyond that too, I mean, I think his performance in Washington doesn't really incur a lot of confidence that he's going to do a good job here.
Yeah, I will say this is a pretty good market for defensive coordinators, and there's going to be some guys that are fired or let go. Like I'll give you an example. Patrick Graham, who is the defensive coordinator with the Raiders, I actually think he's done a pretty good job, all things considered, considering the talent that they have on that side of the ball. He's with the Giants before. I wouldn't be surprised if he gets canned if the Raiders move on from Pete Carroll. It does feel like you're going to be able to get a good candidate. It's just, can you find the right candidate?
Yeah, I mean, I get the two advantages you have this year versus last year is I think the timeline's a little bit better because you already have your head coach in place, and I think the choices that you have, the selection, the pool is much better than it was last year. So I think that's going to provide the Cowboys an opportunity to get a better candidate.
All right, that is it for today's show. We'd like to thank you for tuning in to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. Make sure you subscribe and follow the podcast so you can get all of the latest episodes. And if you need a last-minute holiday gift, I know some of you are still celebrating the holidays, or someone keeps asking you what you want for an upcoming birthday or whatever it is, make it easy. Ask for the Everydayer Club, ad-free episodes of this show, exclusive Discord server access, and so much more. And subscriptions can be gifted through the lockedoncowboys.supercast.com link. And for those of you on video, we can send you the first ever 24/7 national NBA YouTube channel. And on audio, make sure you make your second listen the Locked On NFL podcast. Follow Landon on Twitter at McCoolBCB. I'm at Marcus _Mosher, and we will see you right back here tomorrow.